I am a fan of a new political party. They're called the Breakthrough Party. They are a left-wing, like youth-led democratic socialist party. So we agree on a lot of prescriptions about the way we want to see laws change, the way we want to restructure society in a more direct sense and more kind of um, like short-term sense and the kind of policies that we want to see moving forward. So these are things like the universal basic income. These are things like increasing social housing. These are things like renationalisation of energy, rail, all of these kind of things. I agree with them on the vast majority of these issues, which, with the Labour Party under Starmer as it is, I massively disagree with where he's taken the party in the neoliberal direction. I've talked about this quite a lot, and there's a pretty big break between my political prescriptions and the prescriptions of the Labour Party, mostly because they're trying to basically, their only policy platform, the Labour at the moment, is "We're not Corbyn," which isn't good enough. That's not good enough for me to want to engage with that party on a kind of serious basis. Whether or not I vote for them in the general election remains to be seen. I live in a swing seat, but that's a conversation for another time because, of course, whether or not you can vote for a specific candidate is kind of hamstrung by the political system. But I digress. Breakthrough Party are pretty good. Now, they are a part of a group because there has been so much of a clamouring for different parties with which to challenge the political neoliberal hegemony that is kind of curated by the Conservatives, Labour, and the Liberal Democrats. There were a bunch of parties that sprung up as soon as kind of Keir Starmer became Labour leader because they realised that it wasn't really going into the kind of leftist perspectives that we would like to see represented on the stage. So there was on the political stage rather. So there were. Let me just close this window. The storm's kind of starting now. So a bunch of parties kind of sprang up. There's Left Unity, there is Northern Independence Party, there is Breakthrough Party, and then there's the Trade Unionist Socialist Coalition that's been around for quite a while now. But within first past the post, we all know that having a disparate number of parties competing for the same space within the electoral system does not work. All you do is just end up making all of you irrelevant. So what they have done is they've created a thing called the People's Alliance of the Left, which is, let me just bring up this, which is these four parties all agreeing on some kind of mutually beneficial platform with which to stand on, with which to be able to coalesce our voter bases around different parties at the same time, so that we don't end up splitting the vote, splitting the activism, splitting the way in which we want to maintain our political advocacy. That doesn't get filtered down through four separate channels. It is coalescing around a single channel, just under different kind of banners or different kind of brandings or whatever, which I think is a good thing. I think that's a pragmatic thing to do with which to make sure that there's no kind of vote splitting or whatever. These are not the kind of four major kind of further left parties within British politics. There is another party, which I do not like at all. I like all four of these PAL parties. I do not like this other party, and they are called the Workers' Party of Great Britain. Let me just load up their Twitter profile. You will, and keen political savvy people will recognise this particular party as someone who ran under, I think was it George Galloway might have been their actual candidate in a by-election quite recently. I think it was the I forget which seat it was now. But that's not particularly relevant. They ran basically because there was this kind of disparate breaking between the regular Labour Party fan base in that particular area and a lot of kind of conservative other people who agreed with the leftist perspectives of what should be Labour, but disagreed on a bunch of social conservative issues, right? And so George Galloway, who, as you can see right up at the top there, then ran against Labour to try and split the vote, to try and maybe even win a seat of his own in this particular by-election. They did pretty well. I think they got like 20% of the votes or whatever. Now you'll see here on this particular Twitter page that I have open here, they're all in red, and I have Shinigami eyes installed. So these people are transphobic because they very much are. And you'd say, well, where does this stem from? Funny you should ask that, even though I asked that myself, but I digress. This is not the official name of this party. I mean, it's an official party in which they ran from a kind of electoral platform. What they actually are an electoral front for another political party called CPGB-ML, who, as you can see, also turn up in red on Shinigami Eyes because they're incredibly transphobic. and they're essentially just the conservatism, but through a communist standpoint. People who, like, you've seen people like Infrared and Jackson Hinkle, all these people try and garner a conservative fan base through kind of populist rhetoric to try and funnel them through towards communism or whatever. Now these are run by, I think it's Harpral, I think, is the leader of the CPGBM at the moment. Let me just load up their Wikipedia page so that we know. Let's look at the Wikipedia page. So that's Harpral there, I think, yeah. Let me search for Bra. Yeah, formed by Harpal Bra in 1969. Yeah, so he's been part of the party for a very, very long time, and obviously, calling yourself the Communist Party Marxist-Leninist is very, very difficult from an electoral lens. So you want to be able to have a different front with which to run on a political platform when you're trying to win actual votes and actual constituencies, because you want to be able to move yourself away from the kind of difficult optical mess that you get into by calling yourself communist, because they're not particularly popular, for example, in a kind of post-Red Scare world or whatever. But if we have a look, the vice chairperson here is someone called Jyotibra, who you will recognise if you're a keen, online political follower of all the online discourse. This was the person who Caleb Maupin, yes, Mr. Burger King himself, had on stream, in which which he gave her, as much of a platform that she wanted to be able to spout her transphobic gibberish, saying that somehow that it's somehow anti a materialist philosophy to believe that trans people are the genders that they say they are. For example, I mean, I would agree that just saying that any identity or whatever is because it corresponds to what they believe in their head, that would be some kind of idealist philosophy. I get that, but that's such a complete bastardization of the actual position of people who believe in who respect trans people in general, rather than an argument from utility, which is what I would actually kind of state when I'm talking about transness. I think it's more of a utilitarian standpoint. And from a kind of materialist perspective, there's plenty of material basis for which you can claim the existence of trans people and the affirmation of trans people and the way in which they pervade through society is there is a material basis for that. So saying that all of it is idealism is just kind of nonsense from Jyoti Bra's standpoint, but I digress. Either way, these people are they're not exactly a small portion of the discourse around the kind of far leftist perspectives online, and they're pretty transphobic, as I have said, and that is kind of core part of the kind of platform that they've done, and that's why they created this party, to be able to garner the conservative vote, because they feel like there's a lot of people who have left-wing views in the UK who are pretty socially conservative, and I think particularly in the area of that particular swing seat that they were trying to garner votes in was probably from the Muslim community. Now, I'm not saying that this is something that is inherent to the Islamic community, but I think that it is not unreasonable to state that the Islamic community is more likely to hold a less than ideal view of the LGBT community. I don't think that's necessarily an unreasonable thing to say, to claim, to be able to state. Now, obviously, this has meant that they are not exactly well looked at by the rest of the left in the UK, because most people on the left in the UK are very trans-inclusive. It's a very trans-inclusive space, especially in the leftist space, right? Because I would call myself a communist. I would call myself a Marxist. I would subscribe to a lot of Marxist prescriptions, and I see things through that kind of lens. But what I'm not is a Marxist-Leninist, because, I mean, mostly because it's cringe, but also secondly because, every single time a Marxist-Leninist state appears to, kind of crops up out somewhere, there seems, I don't know why, but there seems to be so many massacres that happen. I don't know what it is about Marxism-Leninism as an ideology that creates so many mass murderers. But you'd think, after a certain amount of mass murders, they'd get the picture and realise that maybe there's something we should change about this ideology. But these people are the most incredibly fucking belligerent members of the online left, that they believe so scientifically that they have the correct ideology, that they then refuse to change their positions, and they refuse to recognise anybody else. What has happened to lay the groundwork again, because I kind of got ahead of myself, to lay the groundwork, because the People's Alliance of the Left is supposed to be some kind of overall unity between the more leftist sections of the British kind of electorate. to try and be essentially the left of Labour, the left of Liberal, left of Labour kind of positions that's been held, people kind of would have assumed that the Workers' Party GB would have kind of folded into that. But because they're so reactionary and so socially conservative about a lot of social issues, what all of the members of the People's Alliance of the Left have done have said that we do not agree with these people. Let me pull up the official statement that Breakthrough put on their Twitter page. Following a number of posts on social media, we feel we must clarify our joint work with People's Alliance of the Left does not include any association with George Galloway or the Workers' Party, whose politics, including LGBTQI and women's rights and immigration, are reconcilable with ours. Now, I think views on immigration, that's not something I really kind of take an issue with. I understand that people have differing views on these things, right? I get that, and most of these are economic in nature, and I think that a lot of Marxists would agree with the kind of reserve army of Labour prescription of immigration, despite it being untrue. There's a really good video by Loner Box that proves that they technically aren't actually the reserve army of Labour when you look at the what happens descriptively and what has happened previously when immigration restrictions have been changed in the UK and what that does to the worker base, but I digress. The issue is just kind of this kind of social issue break, and they've said, well, we don't agree with this. We are overwhelmingly trans inclusive, and we have these specific views about women or whatever, or women's issues. So we do not have any kind of particular link to these people. And all these Workers' Party people, of course, they lost their shit, threw their toys at the pram, started calling everyone who disagreed with them liberals, because again, Marxist-Leninists are like the most incredibly fucking frustrating member of the online left. And partly because I think their ideology is garbage, but mostly just because they believe that they are the one true leftists. These people will recite theory to you like it's fucking scripture, rather than actually engaging with the text and what it actually says and how it can apply to a modern day when you're looking at it through a critical lens. Yeah, call me a revisionist. I don't give a shit. I'm a fucking revisionist. If you're going to call me a revisionist, I guess that I'm just a fucking revisionist, right? It's interesting that Ed Paul says here, this speaks volumes that no Workers' Party people in the comments have tried to defend their organisation, just attacked us, calling us all liberals, saying that we're against the working class. That's someone in my comments, right? Saying, we actually stand for working class values, unlike you liberals. I'm just like, I mean, I don't really care about if you want to call me a liberal or not. I understand that a lot of these people, like these far leftists or whatever, just use it like a slur at this point. They just want to be able to discredit you by calling you a thing they disagree with. Because I wouldn't call myself a liberal. Again, as Chud always says, everyone's views are shaped by the liberalism that they imbibe from society, right? No one's free from liberalism, but I try and critique bits of liberal ideology that I disagree with, and I would fundamentally want to adhere to some kind of materialist Marxist framework in the prescriptions and the things that I advocate for, and these things that I and the points that I make, and the advocacy that I engage in on my YouTube channel, right? I would definitely agree with that, but the fact that they don't even know me, they just think that you disagree with Marxism and Leninism, therefore you must be a liberal. It just states to how infantile these people are. Like, there's a good video by Bad Maths that kind of tears apart this organisation. They've unlisted it, but if you look at their playlist on their channel, you can bring that up. About their old content, which explains this in greater detail as to why I disagree with CPGBML in general. But the fact is that they refuse to actually make any prescriptions. All they just say is thing bad, and that's their platform, right? That is explicitly their platform. And it doesn't help that Workers' Party GB is fronted by someone as cringe as George Galloway, the man who pretended to be a cat on Big Brother. Like, it's frustrating. I have big frustration with George Galloway as a person, because he's like the Jermaine Greer of the left, in that he spends the vast majority of his time making incredibly salient criticisms of, for example, in his case, it would be imperialism, of like the military-industrial complex, a bunch of economic prescriptions around what works for general people. I agree with so many things that he says. And then the other half of the time, he will fucking put his foot in it. He will completely ruin, optically, any kind of benefit that you gain from listening to him. Like, for example, with the Big Brother cat incident, or with his, incredibly socially conservative prescriptions, and the way he attacks people who don't agree with that, and the way in which that he... it's just generally just not a particularly... It's not a particularly agreeable human being. He's incredibly combative and doesn't want to at least have a dialogue with regards to these issues. I just kind of cringe. He's just a bit cringe, which is sad, because again, I agree with him on quite a lot of things, but I do not agree with him on his support of this particular party. But yeah, it's absolutely. I think they're absolutely correct to want to make it very, very clear that they do not agree with these people, because again, they're pretty nasty people. Again, like most Marxist-Leninists are. This is a Marxist-Leninist hit piece. If you're watching it in ML, don't care, didn't ask, plus you're white. But, I agree with the statement that's been made here. I do not agree with the Workers' Party GB, and I do not agree with a lot of their political prescriptions. Again, I can't remember the last time I saw them actually make a policy platform other than just posturing, other than just online posturing, right? So, yeah, that is the People's Alliance of the Left. That is them disregarding the Workers' Party GB. And I absolutely agree with their decision. Well done, People's Alliance of the Left.